Today, this video lecture is going to be over the debate of whether love is chemistry or emotion. For many years, love was believed to be an emotion that was socially constructed, that we love because of the stories and the experiences we've felt, and that there was cultural value in finding love. For some time, love was related to sexuality. For example, Freud related love to his psychosocial stages and the dysfunction within those stages. An example of this was the Oedipus complex of wanting to be or being sexually attracted to your mother. Sexual orientation has been related to love as in what the sex you are attracted to. And marital status has and still is not always about love. It used to be primarily related to economic value, including arranged marriages. While there are still arranged marriages and marriages that continue for economic or possibly parental reasons, it is primarily related to loving your partner as the main reason for being married now. For example, in the ancient Greeks, they had a negative view of love and lust, and it was considered some kind of madness that you were obsessed with someone for reasons other than that they could provide for your family. In the medieval times, love was considered idealistic, and it was a non-sexual quest, which was strange for that time period. And then times it now has became an acceptable reason for marriage. And believing that people should marry for love is widely accepted, especially in North America. Let's talk about the myth of romantic love and the assumptions that come with it. Take a minute and think about what are the media messages or influences that influence your idea of what love is. And what are the messages that are being sent to you about how do you love someone, or how do they love you? How do you behave in a relationship when you're in love? Let's put romantic love into perspective. Is love something that you are powerless over, or is it a choice? What about love at first sight? Can you realistically fall in love with someone when you first meet them? What is the difference between lust and love? These are all great questions and have been debated and researched for years. And the remainder of this lecture is going to kind of talk about what the chemistry of the brain is that might help put to rest some of this myth of romantic love. Similarly to other mammals, mate choice is a behavioral attraction system that is associated with the dopamine reward system. This is similar to how drugs and alcohol work in your brain. Addiction affects the dopamine reward system in your brain. So the first time that you take that drug, it splashes dopamine on your brain, and then your hedonic set point starts to rise in order to meet that normal level of dopamine that you are getting from the drugs and alcohol. So when it comes to love, they're also being triggered by the dopamine and motivation centers of your brain. And dopamine and motivation is being carved into the brain to contribute to certain aspects of romantic love. This research suggests that romantic love is one of the three primary brain systems that evolved from mammals to guide our reproduction. This is where the sex drive comes in. It helps us motivate individuals to seek partners. This is where the sex drive comes in. And sex drives helps motivate us to seek partners, seek specific types of partners, and motivate us to stay together longer. The attachments evolved to motivate us to stay together to complete parenting duties. The one thing that this research basically tells us is that romantic love is distinct from sex drive. As in, sex drive is associated with the balance between androgens and estrogens, and they are not associated with romantic love. While the neural regions of the brain associated with drive overlap with those of courtship and attraction, these two neural systems have differences. They suggest that the sex drive is associated differently in the brain system than love. However, they often interact with each other. There is also brain imaging to suggest that attachment or companion love have distinct different neural pathways, but that these two brain systems interact. For example, oxytocin has been associated with partner preference and attachment, but dopamine pathways have been associated specifically with partner preference. Aaron in 1991 suggested that romantic love is not a primary emotion, but a motivation designed to build and maintain intimate relationships with preferred partners. Helen Fisher suggests that there are 3 different stages of love, and each of these stages have specific hormones or brain neurotransmitters that are associated with them. The first stage is lust. Lust is driven by sex hormones like testosterone or estrogen. This is similar in both men and women. Even though brain imaging studies show that men and women's brain activity is triggered by different areas depending on what they are viewing. For example, men have more brain activity in the regions of visual stimuli, whereas women tend to have more brain activity in the brain regions of memory and emotion. Stage 2 of the stages of love is attraction, and this is that sense of feeling love struck. It's when you feel like you can't think of anything else but the person that you're attracted to. There are 3 main neurotransmitters connected to this stage. The first one is adrenaline. This is initiated in the beginning of falling in love with someone, as it activates that stress response. So it's the parasympathetic nervous system. It releases that adrenaline to be alert. The next one is dopamine. Couples in that love-struck phase tend to have higher levels of dopamine neurotransmitter. This chemical stimulates desire and reward by splashing a sense of pleasure, similarly to how it's released during that initial use of drugs and alcohol. The last neurotransmitter that is related to the attraction phase is serotonin. This is why love seems to change the way that we think. If you've ever noticed feeling that love struck feeling emotion, and all you can think about is that person, but you also do things that you normally wouldn't do, like, stay up really late at night in order to talk to them. Individuals in the attraction phase seem to have similar levels of serotonin as those who have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. This is why you feel like you can't think of anything else, and the only thing that's going to make that thought go away is if you get to talk to that person. Stage 3 of the stages of love is attachment. This is that bond that keeps couples together long enough to raise children. Attachment is associated with the chemicals of oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin is the hormone that is also known as the cuddle hormone. This is the chemical that's released during orgasms for both men and women, and it deepens the feelings of closeness after the orgasm. This chemical is also related to cementing a bond between a mother and a child, as oxytocin is released when they are breastfeeding in order to increase that bond. Vasopressin is a hormone that is important to long-term commitment and is also released after sex. So all of these beg the question, is it love or is it chemistry? Understanding those early feelings and determining if your hormones and brain chemicals are tricking you into thinking it is the type of relationship you want. The reason this is important is because these chemicals can trick you into thinking something is good for you when it may not be. It may be that you're letting your boundaries be crossed when you shouldn't. These chemicals are located in different areas of the brain. The nucleus accumbens is associated with pair bonding and partner preference. This is the part of the brain that sends the oxytocin and dopamine signals to the person to let them know that they are attracted or to start bonding with that person. The ventral pallidum is associated with attachment specifically and releases, again, oxytocin and dopamine. The ventral tegmental area is the main reward area, and it controls the release of vasopressin and dopamine signaling. The raphia nucleus is the part of the brain that gives the sense of calm by releasing vasopressin and oxytocin. This is that feeling of being calm around the person that you're with. So here are some cautions to be aware of in your recovery when getting into a new relationship to make sure that you're not falling prey to your brain's mechanisms and chemicals. First, let's again refer back to love at first sight. I asked you earlier if you believe in love at first sight. And you will still have to determine that for yourself. But based on the research of brain chemicals and hormones, being aware of this when getting into a relationship that feels like love at first sight could be important to determine whether it's the right relationship for you, whether it's going to be good for your recovery and good for yourself. Be cautious of excessive fantasizing. Excessive fantasizing on the person or the relationship, remembering that those chemicals could cause obsessive compulsive thoughts about your partner. Because of the pleasurable feeling that comes with these chemicals during the romantic love period, allowing romance to create drama and excitement in your life could be a problem. This feeling could be addictive, which will be discussed when we go over love addiction in the next module. Be aware of those exaggerated fears that you might have in your relationship. So if you're feeling like insecure about that relationship, those exaggerated fears, that's something to be cautious of whether it's the brain chemicals. Or if you have any abnormal feelings of jealousy. This is not to be confused with appropriate forms of jealousy, which might be communicating to yourself that you need to establish boundaries within your relationship. But being aware of those abnormal cues of jealousy that should be discussed with your partner. Be conscious of any dysfunctional emotions that might occur. An example of this would be fear, a sense of being overwhelmed, polarized feelings like swinging from one extreme emotion to the other, or even attempts to control your emotions like controlling your anger. This can breed resentment, and it's something that needs to be discussed in your relationship. Another important one is to be conscious of weak personal boundaries. This one is important, one, because we've already discussed that boundaries are important in your relationship, but with those brain chemicals, they start to trick your brain into thinking that you can let down those boundaries or be a little bit more flexible than needed, and we want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in danger within your relationship. Recognizing if you have a high tolerance for suffering within your relationships. This sometimes happens with people who have had lots of dishonest or verbally or physically abusive relationships where they tend to think that this is a part of their relationship, and so they take a high level of that tolerance. And so be conscious about whether you're accepting this dishonesty, accepting this verbal talk, or if the brain chemicals and hormones are allowing you to accept those when normally you wouldn't. So recognizing whether you're accepting the dishonesty or being ruled by your libido. This again comes back to confusing true love with that lust feeling like we talked about in stage 1, where you're deeply attracted to the person, but it's not necessarily where you have gotten to the point to trust them for love. Are you confusing need with want? Do you need a relationship or do you want the relationship? Similarly to whether do you need that partner or do you choose to be with that partner? That comes in and distinguishes the difference between maybe a codependent relationship. Do you or your partner have the compelling need to control one another or manipulate each other? That's something to be aware of. Is there excessive nagging going on in your relationship? There is a difference between expressing your emotions and setting boundaries and just plain nagging. Nagging is bred from resentment, and so that's the part that you want to deal with. Being helpless. This is turning to your partner for pretty much anything and not being able to do things on your own. That comes back to that codependent relationship. Whether you're projecting guilt or trying to stimulate jealousy or situations of jealousy, the silent treatment or contempt for your partner. Watch out for sex being the only connection that you have. Does sex mean love, or are there other components besides sex that provide that love? Negative caretaking. These are things like enabling or rescuing the person, so taking care of them when it's really something that they should be taking care for themselves. Also be aware of that sense of rage or hysteria. These can all be signs that chemicals are possibly influencing your attraction or love and could possibly lead to an addictive relationship, which we will discuss in later lectures.